In the misty hills of New England, where autumn paints memories in gold and crimson, Thomas Mitchell methodically restores an old cabin, each hammer strike echoing through his lonely days. For the past year since losing his wife, woodworking has been his sole companion. What he doesn't know is that the cabin's owner, Eleanor Lawrence, built her tech empire on the same determination that once made her walk away from their love 50 years ago. Now, seeking refuge from her hollow success, she's returning to the one place that still holds her heart, only to find the man she left behind, bringing their shared dream back to life, one nail at a time. His weathered hands reach for the old leather toolbox, its brass latches worn smooth from generations of use. Thomas runs his fingers over the embossed initials, JM for James Mitchell, his father, feeling the weight of legacy and loss in equal measure. Inside, each tool tells a story: the hammer that built his first home, the plane that smoothed his daughter's cradle, the level that hasn't lost its truth in 60 years. Like him, they're old, but far from finished. Through the cabin's broken windows, morning light catches dust motes dancing in the air, and for a moment, Thomas stands still, letting the quiet settle around him. He doesn't know it yet, but every repair he makes to this cabin is a step toward mending something far more precious than wood and nails. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas wakes each morning at precisely 6:15, a habit carved deep by decades of routine. He doesn't need an alarm anymore. His body knows the rhythm of solitude. The queen-sized bed remains perfectly made on one side, untouched for 14 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. He doesn't count anymore, but the numbers come anyway. In the kitchen, his movements are automatic. The coffee maker gurgles to life, its aroma filling the empty space where conversation used to be. He reaches for a particular mug in the cabinet, slightly chipped, hand-painted with cheerful yellow daisies. Margaret had made it in their daughter Karen's pottery class 15 years ago. "Every morning needs a little sunshine," she'd said, pressing it into his hands. The chip happened 3 years later. He'd almost cried then, but Margaret just smiled and said it gave the mug character. Now he traces the chip with his thumb, a morning ritual as essential as the coffee itself. The kitchen window faces east, and he stands there, watching the sun climb over the maple trees they planted when they first bought the house. The branches are heavy with autumn, leaves turning the same fierce red as Margaret's hair had been when they first met. "You'd tell me I'm moping," he says to the empty kitchen, and almost hears her laughing reply, "Damn right I would, Tom Mitchell." The real estate agent's call had come yesterday, breaking the familiar pattern of his days. Sarah Chen, who'd sold them this house 30 years ago, now barely older than his daughter. "I have an interesting proposition for you, Tom," she'd said, her voice carrying that careful optimism people use with widowers. "There's a cabin out on Old Mill Road. Owner wants it restored, not renovated. They specifically asked for someone with traditional carpentry experience." He'd almost said no. The garden needed tending, and Karen had been asking him to visit Boston for Thanksgiving. But Margaret's voice came again, clear as the morning light. "You're not done yet, old man." Thomas rinses the mug, dries it carefully, and places it back in its spot in the cabinet. Upstairs, he dresses in worn jeans and a flannel shirt that still smells faintly of sawdust from his last project, building a dollhouse for his granddaughter Emma. His tool belt hangs by the door, the leather supple with age and use. The truck starts on the second try, protesting the morning chill. Thomas backs out of the driveway, past Margaret's garden where late autumn roses still bloom, defiant against the coming frost. The radio plays softly, some old song about second, chances that he doesn't quite recognize. On the passenger seat lies Sarah's folder, containing what little information she could share about the project. The owner wants anonymity, which isn't unusual for properties up here. Wealthy people from Boston or New York often buy old places, dreaming of rural retreats they'll visit twice a year. But something about this one feels different. The specifications are unusually detailed. Original materials where possible, traditional. Methods only, no modern shortcuts. It's like they want to step back in time, Sarah had said. Thomas understands that desire better than most. Every morning, he steps into a house full of memories where each room holds echoes of a life built over 43 years of marriage. But lately, he started to wonder if looking back is all he has left. At a red light, he glances at his reflection. In the rearview mirror, grey hair neatly combed, face weathered but clean-shaven, Margaret never liked beard burn. The eyes that look back at him are tired but clear. For the first time in months, they hold something that looks almost like curiosity. "Well, Margie," he says to the empty truck, "let's see what kind of adventure you've gotten me into this time." He turns onto Old Mill Road, where the trees arch overhead like the roof of a cathedral. Somewhere ahead lies a cabin waiting to be restored, its mysteries still unknown. Thomas feels something stir in his chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its quiet cousin, possibility. Sarah's silver Prius is already parked at the end of the gravel drive when Thomas arrives. She stands near the trunk, tablet in hand, her dark hair lifting slightly in the morning breeze. The sight of her professional attire, crisp blazer, and practical boots against the backdrop of wilderness almost makes him smile. Almost. "Right on time," she calls out, walking over as he parks. "Ready to see her?" The cabin sits back from the road, half hidden by decades of unchecked growth. Thomas's trained eye catches the essentials immediately. Solid foundation, good bones, worn but salvageable cedar siding. The roof will need complete replacement, but the original stone chimney stands straight and true. "Here's everything we have on the property," Sarah says, pulling a thick manila envelope from her bag. "Including these." She hands him a rolled set of blueprints, the paper yellow with age. As Thomas unfurls them carefully, his breath catches. The drafting style, the detailed annotations, the precise measurements. He knows this hand. He should. He spent countless nights watching Eleanor Lawrence draw these very plans, her dark hair falling forward as she bent over the drafting table in her father's study. "Tom, you okay?" He realizes he's been staring at the plans too long. "Fine," he manages. "Just reminds me of something." The blueprints are dated 1973. The summer everything changed. The summer he and Eleanor had planned to build their future here, on this very plot of land. He'd borrowed money from his father for the down payment, and she'd drawn up the plans. Every detail, a perfect blend of his craftsmanship and her vision. Then came the letter from MIT, the fellowship she couldn't refuse, the future that pulled her toward a different horizon. Sarah leads him through the cabin's rooms, pointing out areas of concern, but Thomas barely hears her. Every step brings back memories he'd thought long buried. The layout is exactly as they'd planned it. Open concept living area with high ceilings, large windows positioned to catch both morning and evening light, a loft space overlooking it all. Even the dimensions are the same. Eleanor had insisted on the precise measurements, calculating the golden ratio for perfect proportion. In the basement, his flashlight beam reveals massive support beams, hand-hewn from local oak, and there, partially hidden behind decades of cobwebs, he sees it. His hands shake slightly as he brushes away the dust. Carved into the beam are the initials he'd almost forgotten. T+E 1973, enclosed in a heart with a small infinity symbol beneath. "Find something interesting?" Sarah asks from the stairs. "Just checking the beam integrity," he lies, his voice rougher than he intends. Back outside, Sarah runs through the contract details. The owner wants the work completed within 6 months, before next spring. The budget is generous, with emphasis on historical accuracy and traditional methods. No questions asked, no direct contact with the owner. Everything goes through Sarah. "They're very private," she explains, "but they trust your reputation." Your work on the old Jenkins place impressed them. Thomas nods, only half listening. His mind is on the blueprints, on the beam downstairs, on a summer 50 years ago when the future seemed as clear as the mountain air. He should say no. Should. Walk away from this ghost of what might have been. Instead, he hears himself asking, "When can I start?" Sarah beams. "How's tomorrow? I'll have the keys and contracts ready first thing." As he drives home, the blueprints safely stowed on his passenger seat, Thomas thinks about calling Karen, telling her about the coincidence, but how could he explain? He's never told his daughter about Eleanor, about the cabin they'd planned, about the dreams that lived and died that summer. Margaret knew, of course. On their first date, he'd taken her to this very spot and told her everything. She'd listened, squeezed his hand and said, "The past makes us who we are, Tom. It's what we do with the present that matters. The present right now is a tool belt that needs checking, plans that need reviewing, and a cabin that needs saving." If his hands shake slightly as he unrolls the blueprints on his workbench that evening, well, that's between him and the ghost of a love he thought he'd left behind half a century ago. Dawn breaks cold and clear as Thomas pulls up to the cabin. Frost edges the tall grass, and his breath forms clouds in the autumn air. He's brought coffee in a thermos. Not Margaret's mug today. Some memories are best left at home. The key, Sarah, gave him fits smoothly in the lock, though the door needs a firm push to open. Inside, morning light streams through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like memories in the air. Thomas sets his toolbox down. The sound echoes through empty rooms, and begins his assessment. Start at the foundation and work. Up, his father always said. Thomas runs his hands along the baseboards, feeling for rot, for weakness. The wood is solid oak, the kind you can't find anymore. His fingers catch on something, a small notch near the floor. He kneels, joints protesting, and finds himself eye level with elaborate initials carved into the wood. EL plus TM. Suddenly, it's 1973 again. Eleanor kneeling there, pocket knife in hand, her bell-bottom jeans dusty from the construction site. "For posterity," she'd said, dark eyes dancing. "So someday, our grandchildren will know where it all began." Thomas stands, abruptly ignoring the twinge in his back. He has work to do. The windows need reglazing, the floorboards need inspection, the walls. But the memories flood in like light through broken panes. Eleanor, spreading blueprints across a fallen log, pointing out where each room would be. Her father had taught. Her drafting encouraged her talent, even when other girls were being steered toward typing classes and home economics. "See how the morning light will hit here," she'd explained, tracing the paper with elegant fingers. "And in the evening, we'll have the perfect view of the sunset from our bedroom." They'd spent that whole summer planning, dreaming. He'd work. Construction during the day. She'd attend community college classes. And every evening they'd meet here. Sometimes they'd bring picnic dinners, sitting on the foundation they'd just poured, talking about paint colors and window treatments and how many children they'd have. Thomas forces himself back to the present. He has a job to do. Methodically, he begins documenting needed repairs. Window frames, door jambs, flooring. The work is familiar, grounding, until he reaches the kitchen space. The original plans had called for a breakfast nook here, with built-in benches. Eleanor had sketched it precisely, a cozy corner where they'd drink coffee and watch the sunrise. Now, standing in that exact spot, Thomas sees not empty space, but the ghost of that dream, so clear he could almost reach out and touch it. A loud creak from above startles him. Just the house settling, he tells himself, but his heart races anyway. Up in the loft, he finds more evidence of their shared past. Hidden behind a loose board, he discovers a time capsule of sorts. A mason jar containing a faded photograph, a handwritten letter he can't bring himself to read, and a small brass key he recognizes instantly, the one Eleanor had worn on a chain around her neck. "Oh, Elle," he whispers to the empty room. "What happened to us?" He knows what happened. The letter from MIT had arrived in August. Full fellowship, a chance to study computer science when the field was just beginning. A future so bright it blinded them both. He told her to go, knowing he couldn't leave his family's construction business, his roots in this small town. She'd cried, promised to write, to come back. Neither of them had understood that some doors, once closed, stay closed. The afternoon light is fading when Thomas finally begins actual work, starting with the windows. Each piece of old glass he removes feels like peeling back another layer of time. By sunset, he's reglazed 2 windows in the main room, using the same techniques his father taught him. The work is precise, demanding complete focus, leaving no room for ghosts. As he's packing up his tools, his phone buzzes. A text from Karen. "Dad, don't forget Emma's ballet recital next weekend. She's asking for her favorite grandpa." Reality rushes back. His life didn't stop when Eleanor left. He built a different dream with Margaret, raised their daughter, found joy in simple things. The life they shared wasn't a consolation prize. It was a gift, rich and full and real. Still, as he locks up the cabin, Thomas can't shake the feeling that he's not just restoring a building. He's unearthing something that never quite died, something that's been waiting patiently in the dark, like seeds dormant beneath winter soil. In his truck, he finds himself humming an old song, one Eleanor used to love, something about time healing all wounds. He catches his reflection in the rearview mirror and sees not just a widower, not just a craftsman, but a man standing at the intersection of past and present, holding tools that can repair more than just wood and glass. The cover of Tech Innovation Quarterly lies on Eleanor Lawrence's desk, her own face staring back at her. The Woman Who Built Tomorrow, Eleanor Lawrence's journey from rural New England to Silicon Valley's summit. The photographer had captured her in her signature pose. Steel grey hair, elegant but unstudied, black turtleneck crisp, hands clasped before her on the sleek desk. The perfect image of a tech visionary. What the camera couldn't capture was the exhaustion. 50 years of building, innovating, pushing boundaries, and for what? Her apartment occupies the top floor of a San Francisco high-rise, all glass and chrome and spectacular views. But most nights, she finds herself staring at the wall rather than the Golden Gate Bridge. "Miss Lawrence?" Her assistant's voice comes through the intercom. "The board is waiting." Eleanor straightens her spine, checks her reflection in the darkened monitor. At 72, she still cuts an impressive figure. No one would guess that under her carefully curated exterior, something is crumbling. The boardroom falls silent as she enters. 12 faces turn toward her, eager to hear about the company's next revolution. Instead, she opens with, "I'm taking a leave of absence." The silence shifts from respectful to stunned. Eleanor continues before anyone can object. "For 6 months, Gregory will oversee day-to-day operations. I'll be reachable for emergencies only. But the AI initiative," Gregory starts, "will proceed as planned." Her tone brooks no argument. She's earned this authority, built it from lines of code and sleepless nights and sacrifices they'll never understand. Later, alone in her office, Eleanor unlocks her desk's bottom drawer. Behind the files and folders sits a small wooden box she hasn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in faded silk, lies a magazine from 1973. MIT's Rising Stars, Meet the Women Changing Computer Science. Her younger self beams from the yellowed pages, dark hair falling past her shoulders, eyes bright with ambition. The article mentions her fellowship, her groundbreaking work in early programming languages. What it doesn't mention is the cabin she left behind, or the man who would have built it with her, the man whose hands could shape wood the way she shaped code, creating something solid and real while she chased digital dreams. Her phone chimes, another crisis demanding attention, but her eyes catch on something else in the box, a small brass key on a tarnished chain. She'd worn it every day that summer, until the day she packed for MIT. The realtor's email had come 3 months ago. The property was available. The same plot of land, untouched after all these years. She'd bought it immediately, through layers of LLCs to ensure privacy, had specified traditional restoration methods, hoping to preserve whatever echoes remained of those summer dreams. "Miss Lawrence," her assistant again, "your car is waiting." Eleanor slips the magazine back into its box, but the key she puts in her pocket. Its weight feels familiar, like a line of code she wrote long ago, still running somewhere, in the background of her life. In the elevator, her reflection fragments across mirrored walls. Eleanor Lawrence, tech pioneer. Eleanor Lawrence, billionaire innovator. Eleanor Lawrence, who once drew blueprints for a simple cabin in the woods, believing love was enough to build a future on. The board will adapt. They always do. Her company will continue its relentless march toward the future. But Eleanor is finally ready to look back. In her private car heading home, she opens her laptop one last time. The restoration progress report sits unopened in her inbox. Her finger hovers over the attachment, trembling slightly. Not yet. Some code isn't ready to be debugged. Instead, she pulls up real estate listings in the area around her old hometown. A small condo, perhaps. Something manageable. Somewhere to stay while she what? Watches strangers rebuild the home she designed for a life she chose. Not to live? The key in her pocket seems to grow heavier. Eleanor closes her laptop, leans back against soft leather, and allows herself to remember the scent of sawdust and summer air, the sound of hammer on nail, the feel of rough blueprints under eager fingers. For the first time in decades, she lets herself wonder, what if? The bell above Wilson's hardware chimes as Thomas pushes through the door, bringing with him the crisp October air. The store hasn't changed in 40 years, same creaking floorboards, same floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with everything from penny nails to power tools. A vintage radio on the counter plays softly, the kind they don't make anymore, all tubes and warm sound. "Back again?" Joe Wilson looks up from his inventory sheets, reading glasses perched on his nose. At 65, he's one of the few people in town who remembers the store when his father ran it. Must be a big project. "Restoration work up on Old Mill Road," Thomas replies, running his fingers along a length of crown molding. "Need period-appropriate hardware for the windows." Joe's eyes light up. "The Lawrence property." Thomas's hand stills on the wood. "You know about it. Remember when old man Lawrence still owned it? His daughter used to come in here with these detailed drawings, asking about different types of hinges, comparing wood samples." Joe chuckles. "Smart as a whip, that one. Whatever happened to her?" The radio crackles, switching songs. Dusty Springfield's "The Look of Love" fills the space between them, and Thomas is suddenly back in 1973, dancing with Eleanor in the unfinished cabin, her head on his shoulder as they swayed between stacks of lumber. "She went to MIT, Thomas says finally. "Made quite a name for herself, I hear." Joe studies him for a moment. "That's right. You two were sweet on each other that summer, weren't you? Before she left for college." Rather than answer, Thomas pulls out his list. "Need brass window latches, the kind they would have used in the 70s, and some of that old-growth pine for the window frames if you've still got any." Joe disappears into the back room, emerging with a dusty box. "Found these last month when I was cleaning out Dad's old storage. Original stock, never been used." He sets a tarnished brass window latch on the counter. "They don't make them like this anymore." The craftsmanship is evident in every detail, the weight of it, the smooth action of the mechanism. Thomas picks it up, feeling its solid reality in his palm. "How many do you have?" "Enough to do the whole cabin, I'd wager." Joe starts laying them out on the counter. "Dad always said to keep the good stuff just in case." Speaking of good stuff, he reaches under the counter and pulls out an old transistor radio. "Found this too. Still works perfect. Thought you might want some company up there while you work." Thomas recognizes it. The same model Eleanor had brought to the construction site that summer. She'd tune it to the classical station while she worked on her drawing, saying the music helped her think. "Thanks, Joe, but I don't need—" "On the house," Joe interrupts, already wrapping it in brown paper. "Consider it a welcome back gift. To the trade, I mean. Haven't seen you take on a project since Margaret." He trails off, but Thomas nods, understanding. "Been a while." As Joe rings up the window hardware, another song starts playing, "Time of the Season" by the Zombies. Thomas finds himself humming along, remembering Eleanor singing it while she painted primer on the foundation walls. "You know," Joe says carefully, counting out brass screws, "sometimes the universe has a funny way of bringing things full circle. My Clara always said that." Thomas thinks of the carved initials in the basement beam, the blueprints with Eleanor's precise handwriting, the brass key he'd found in the time capsule. Maybe so. The radio switches songs again as he loads his purchases into the truck. This time it's Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell, Eleanor's favorite. She'd played it the night she told him about MIT, both of them sitting on the cabin's half-finished porch, watching summer stars wheel overhead. Back at the cabin, Thomas sets up Joe's radio on a makeshift workbench. The classical station comes in clear through the old speakers, filling the empty rooms with Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. He remembers Eleanor explaining why she loved this piece, how the single instrument could create such complex harmony, how each note built upon the last to create something greater than its parts. As he works on the first window frame, matching new wood to old with careful joints, Thomas realizes he's humming along. The music, the wood, the familiar movements of his hands. It all feels right in a way nothing has since Margaret died. Like coming home to a place he'd forgotten existed. By sunset, he's completed 2 window frames and started on a third. The radio plays on, a soundtrack to his memories, each song a thread connecting past to present. When he finally packs up, his tools, the last notes of another old song, fade into the gathering dark. He can't quite place it, but it makes him think of second chances. Eleanor's penthouse feels different now that she's decided to leave it. The sweeping views of San Francisco Bay seem less impressive, more like a postcard she's looked at too many times. She moves through the space methodically, selecting what to take, what to store, what to leave behind. In her home office, she opens her laptop to write instructions for the cabin's craftsman. Her fingers hover over the keys, but the words won't come. How strange that after decades of writing code, of building digital architectures that change the world, she can't find the language for this simple task. Instead, she opens her desk drawer and removes an envelope she hasn't touched in years. Inside is a letter she wrote but never sent, dated August 15th, 1973. The paper has yellowed, but her handwriting remains clear, precise as the blueprints she used to draw. "Dear Tom, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to Cambridge. I know we said we'd write, that we'd find a way to make it work, but sitting here in my father's study, looking at our cabin plans one last time, I'm finally being honest with myself. And you deserve that honesty. I'm scared, Tom, not of MIT, not of the future, but of how much I love you, of how easily I could choose our quiet life over everything else I dream of becoming. When I'm with you, working on the cabin, planning our future, it all seems so clear. But at night, lying awake, I hear the world calling. There are computers being built that can think in ways we've never imagined. Languages waiting to be written, a whole digital frontier, and I want to be part of shaping it. You told me to go, to chase my dreams. You said you'd wait, but I can't let you do that. You have your own dreams. They're as solid and real as the homes you build. I see how your eyes light up when you talk about carrying on your father's legacy, about creating spaces where families will grow and memories will be made. Your future is here, rooted in this land we both love. Mine is somewhere else, at least for now. And if I don't go, if I don't find out what I'm capable of, I'm afraid I'll spend the rest of my life wondering. Worse, I'm afraid I'll end up resenting the very life I thought I wanted more than anything. The key to the cabin is in the time capsule we buried in the loft. I'm leaving it there, along with this letter and our picture from the summer fair. Maybe someday, when we're both old and grey, we'll meet again. Maybe by then I'll have built something as real and lasting as the homes you create. All my love, Eleanor. She sets the old letter aside and pulls out fresh paper. Not company letterhead, but simple cream-coloured stationery. Her Mont Blanc pen feels heavy in her hand as she begins to write. To the craftsman restoring my cabin, I trust Sarah has conveyed the technical specifications, but there are some things that can't be captured in a contract. This cabin isn't just a building to me. It's a dream I once shared with someone who understood that creating something with your hands is an act of love. The original blueprints were drawn 50 years ago, when I believed that life could be mapped out as precisely as floor plans. I've learned since then that the most important details can't be measured with a ruler or captured in technical specifications. As you work, you may find traces of that old dream. Initials carved in wood, a time capsule in the loft, marks of plans that never came to be. Please treat them gently. They're part of the story this cabin has to tell. I'll be arriving in early December to see the progress. Until then, know that every nail you drive, every board you replace, is helping to rebuild more than just a structure. Sincerely, Eleanor Lawrence. She seals both letters in a single envelope, past and present, side by side. Tomorrow, she'll have her assistant deliver it to Sarah. For now, Eleanor walks to her window one last time, watching the fog roll in beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. She's spent her life building bridges between the physical and digital worlds. Perhaps it's time to build one between past and future. The storm wasn't in the forecast. Thomas first notices the change in air pressure as he's finishing up the last window frame, a heaviness that makes his old shoulder injury ache. Dark clouds mass over the mountains, and the wind picks up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. He should pack up and head home. Instead, he finds himself moving through the cabin, securing loose materials, covering the tools that can't get wet. The first fat drops hit the roof as he's bringing in the last of the lumber from outside. Looks like we're in for a rough one, he mutters to himself, watching lightning flash across the darkening sky. The weather app on his phone shows a severe storm warning, potential for high winds and flooding. He should leave now before the roads get bad, but something holds him there. The old storm lantern he found in the basement earlier that week sits on his workbench, cleaned and ready with fresh oil. As if it had been waiting for exactly this moment, Thomas lights it, and warm golden light fills the space, casting long shadows on the walls. The rain comes in earnest now, drumming on the new sections of roof he's installed. Through the gaps in the old sections, water begins to drip. Thomas moves his tools higher, then notices water pooling near the north wall, right where he'd planned to start work tomorrow. "Well, can't let you flood, old girl," he says to the cabin. From his truck he retrieves a tarp and some rope. The wind fights him as he works to cover the vulnerable section of roof, rain soaking through his flannel shirt. By the time he finishes, he's drenched and shivering. The storm lantern's light welcomes him back inside. Its warm glow reminds him of another storm 50 years ago when he and Eleanor had sheltered here. The cabin was just a framework then, walls but no windows, roof only half finished. They'd huddled under a tarp, sharing a thermos of coffee, watching lightning illuminate the skeleton of their future home. Thunder crashes overhead, and Thomas jumps slightly. In the lantern light, shadows dance across the walls like memories. Trying to take shape, he retrieves a blanket from his truck, changes into the spare shirt he keeps with his tools, and settles in to wait out the storm. The radio Joe gave him still works. Through bursts of static, he catches fragments of weather, reports and old songs. The lantern flickers as wind howls through the gaps in the walls, and Thomas finds himself cataloguing all the work yet to be done. Weather stripping here, insulation there, new shingles above. His phone buzzes, Karen checking in. "I'm fine," he texts back. "Staying dry at the cabin." She replies with a worried emoji, but he assures her he's safe. Safer than driving in this weather, at least. The storm intensifies. Thomas moves through the cabin with his lantern, checking for leaks, placing buckets where needed. In the loft, water trickles down one wall, threatening the time capsule's hiding place. Without thinking, he retrieves the mason jar, cradling it as he descends the ladder. In the lantern's glow, the contents seem to glow with their own light. The photograph, the letter he still hasn't read, the brass key on its tarnished chain. Thunder rumbles again, closer now, and Thomas's hands shake slightly as he opens the jar. The photograph first, him and Eleanor at the summer fair, corn dogs in hand, laughing at something now lost to time, her dark hair caught in the wind, his arm around her waist. They look so young, so certain of their future. Lightning flashes, and for a moment, Thomas swears he sees their reflections in the window glass, young again, full of dreams. But it's just him now, grey-haired and weather-worn, holding the ghost of what might have been. The letter remains unopened. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. He returns everything to the jar except the key, which he places carefully. Beside the storm lantern, its brass surface catches the light, throwing unexpected warmth into the shadows. Hours pass. Thomas dozes in his truck's cab, waking occasionally to check the buckets and move them as needed. The radio plays softly. Carole King's "It's Too Late," bleeding through the static. Sometime past midnight, the storm begins to ease. By dawn, the rain has settled into a gentle patter. Morning light reveals the storm's impact, new leaks to fix, wet spots to dry, challenges to meet. But the cabin has stood firm, its bones still strong after all these years. As Thomas packs up to leave, the storm lantern catches his eye. Without quite knowing why, he leaves it burning, a small flame of warmth in the rain-washed quiet. Let it keep watch, he thinks, over all the stories these walls still hold. The morning fog hasn't lifted when Eleanor's rental car turns onto Old Mill Road. She's a week early, her carefully planned December arrival abandoned after a sleepless night in her Boston hotel. The silver locket she's worn since yesterday feels heavy against her collarbone, its familiar weight both comfort and burden. Inside, the same photograph that's in the time capsule, two young lovers at a summer fair, their whole lives ahead of them. She almost misses the turn. The gravel drive is more overgrown than she remembered. But then the cabin comes into view, through the mist, and her breath catches. Even half restored, it's exactly as she drew it all those years ago. The proportions, the roofline, the way it sits naturally in the landscape as if it grew there. A truck is parked outside. Work must start early, she thinks, noting the carpenter's tools visible through the windows. She hadn't planned on meeting the craftsman yet, had wanted to see the cabin alone first. But perhaps it's better this way. Eleanor checks her reflection. In the rearview mirror, more habit than vanity. Her hair is swept back in its usual elegant style, silver now instead of dark brown. She's traded her usual executive wear for simple slacks and a cashmere sweater. But something of the CEO remains in her posture as she steps from the car. The cabin door is open. Music drifts out. Classical, Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. Her steps falter. It can't be. She reaches the doorway just as he turns around, and time stops. Thomas stands at his workbench, a piece of crown molding in his weathered hands. For a moment, neither moves. The music plays on, filling the silence between them. With memories. Elle. His voice is rougher than she remembers, but the way he says her name, that hasn't changed in 50 years. Hello, Tom. She's rehearsed 100 different speeches, but all she can manage is, the windows look good. A ghost of a smile touches his lips. Period-appropriate hardware. Joe Wilson had some old stock. Joe's still running the hardware. Store? Some things don't change. The weight of everything that has changed hangs between them. Eleanor's fingers go to her locket, and she sees Thomas's eyes follow the movement, recognition flickering across his face. You kept it, he says. softly. "You found the time capsule." He nods toward his workbench, where the mason jar sits beside a burning storm lantern. "Had to rescue it during the storm last week. Roof leaked." "It always did," she says. And suddenly they're both smiling, remembering all the times they'd huddled under tarps, planning improvements they never got to make. Eleanor moves further into the cabin, taking in the work he's done. Her trained eye sees the care in every repair, the respect for original materials, the attention to detail that marks a true craftsman. "You're doing beautiful work, Tom. Just following the blueprints." He pauses. "Your blueprints." She turns back to him, seeing now what she missed in the first shock of recognition, the grief in the lines around his eyes, the wedding ring he still wears. "I heard about Margaret. I'm so sorry, Tom." "Thank you." He sets down the molding, wipes his hands on his work pants. "She knew about you, you know, about that summer, about the cabin. She must have been remarkable." "She was." His voice holds love without apology, and something in Eleanor's heart eases. They're too old for jealousy now, too wise for regret. The music changes. Another Bach suite, slower, more contemplative. Through the newly glazed windows, morning sun finally breaks through the fog, painting the room in soft light. "I don't know if I can stay," Eleanor says suddenly. "Seeing you here in the home we planned." "I can finish the work and go," Thomas offers. "Find another carpenter." "No," the word comes quickly, surprising them both. "No, you understand. This place, what it was meant to be." Their eyes meet, half a century of lived experience between them. The young lovers from the photograph are gone, but something else has taken their place. Something quieter, perhaps, but no less real. The storm lantern still burns on the workbench, though morning has fully arrived. Neither moves to extinguish it. The day passes in a strange dance of avoidance and awareness. Eleanor stays, moving through the cabin like a ghost from their shared past, while Thomas continues his work. Neither mentions lunch until Joe Wilson's wife Clara appears with a thermos of coffee and a basket of sandwiches. "Thought you might need..." Clara stops mid-sentence, recognizing Eleanor despite the decades. "Well, I'll be..." "Clara..." Eleanor smiles, remembering the girl who'd worked summers at the hardware store. "You married Joe, after all." "Some of us knew a good thing when we saw it." Clara sets down her offerings with a meaningful look at them both. "I'll leave you to it." The coffee steams in the autumn air, its aroma filling the space between them. Thomas pours it into 2 ceramic mugs from Clara's basket, hands one to Eleanor. Their fingers don't quite touch in the exchange. "You've kept the original layout," Eleanor observes, sipping her coffee. It's exactly how she remembers Clara making it, strong, with just a hint of cinnamon. "Your design was sound." Thomas measures a length of baseboard. "Good bones, like your father used to say." The mention of her father hangs in the air. Eleanor moves to the window, watching leaves scatter across the yard. "He never understood why I left. Said I was choosing dreams over reality. Were you?" "I thought I was choosing both." She turns back to him. "The digital world was just beginning, Tom. We were writing the future one line of code at a time. It felt like building something from nothing." He smiles slightly. "I know the feeling." The afternoon light shifts, casting long shadows through the newly glazed windows. Thomas works steadily, the rhythm of his movements as familiar to Eleanor as her own heartbeat. She finds herself watching his hands, more weathered now, but still sure, still strong. At some point, she retrieves her laptop from the car, settles in the corner that will eventually be the breakfast nook. The sound of Thomas's work mingles with the soft click of her keys. For hours, they exist in parallel, each in their own world, but somehow together. As dusk approaches, Thomas builds a small fire in the newly cleaned fireplace. Eleanor looks up from her screen to find him offering a second cup of coffee from Clara's thermos. "Still take it black?" She nods, accepting the mug. Their fingers brush this time, sending echoes of memory through them both. The fire catches properly, and Thomas steps back to admire his work. "First fire in this hearth in 50 years. We never got to light one back then. Eleanor moves to stand beside him, watching the flames. The chimney wasn't finished before MIT. He doesn't say it with bitterness, just fact. They stand in silence, firelight dancing across their faces. Eleanor's hand goes to her locket again, a gesture Thomas is beginning to recognize as her tell, something she does when the past weighs heavy. Karen wants me to spend Thanksgiving in Boston with her family, he says suddenly. My daughter, he adds, though Eleanor probably knows this from her research. She wouldn't be a successful CEO without doing her due diligence. You should go. Eleanor's voice is soft. Family is important. What about you? Board meetings usually. This year, she shrugs. This year I'm taking a leave of absence. The implications of that statement fill the room. Thomas adds another log to the fire, careful with the placement. The breakfast nook still needs work, he says finally. And the upstairs windows. How long? Month, maybe 2. He straightens up, faces her. If you want me to finish. Eleanor looks around the cabin, at the careful repairs, the preserved details, the way Thomas has understood and respected every aspect of her original design. I want you to finish, she says quietly, as if on cue. The old radio on his workbench crackles to life after hours of silence. Joni Mitchell's voice fills the space between them. I've looked at love from both sides now. Their eyes meet, and a lifetime of choices, regrets, and acceptance passes between them. Outside, the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Inside, the fire burns steady and sure, warming them both. The telegram arrives with the morning sun, not the original from 50 years ago, but its ghost, falling out of an old book Eleanor finds while helping Thomas catalogue items from the loft. The paper is thin, delicate with age, its typed message, still sharp enough to cut. Fellowship approved, stop full funding, MIT computer science, stop start, September, stop congratulations, stop. I kept it, Eleanor says, her voice strange. All these years, I kept it. Thomas continues measuring the loft's window frame, his back to her, like I kept the blueprints. Tom, don't. His hand still on the wood. Some things are better left in the past. But Eleanor has spent decades in boardrooms facing down harder conversations than this. We never really talked about it. About why you what? He turns finally, and there's something raw in his expression. Why you left? Why you never came back? Why you didn't even come to your father's funeral? The last accusation hits her like a physical blow. You were there. Someone had to be. He'd lost his wife, and then his daughter disappeared into her digital world. There's no anger in his voice, just an old sadness. He kept every article about you, you know, every magazine cover, every news clipping, had them all in a box in his study. Eleanor sinks onto a stack of lumber, the telegram trembling in her hands. I thought he hated me for leaving. He was proud of you, and heartbroken. Both things can be true at once. A jay calls outside, sharp and clear in the autumn morning. Through the window, Eleanor can see the mountains where nothing seems to change, but everything has. I was scared, she says finally. Not of MIT, not of leaving. I was scared of how much I loved you, of how easily I could have stayed. I would have supported your dreams, Elle. You didn't have to choose, didn't I? She stands, faces him. Be honest, Tom. Could you have left here, left your family's business, your father's legacy, followed me to Cambridge? His silence is answer enough. And I couldn't stay, not then. The world was changing so fast, computers, programming, the digital revolution. I knew if I didn't go, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Instead, I got to do the wondering. The words escape before he can stop them. That's not fair. No? Thomas picks up a piece of sandpaper, runs it over the window frame with more force than necessary. You weren't the only one with dreams, Elle. I had plans too. A business to build, homes to create, a life to live right here, with Margaret. It's not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Yes, with Margaret. He sets down the sandpaper. turns to face her fully. She knew about you, about this place. First time I brought her here, I told her everything. Know what she said? She said, "The past makes us who we are, Tom. It's what we do with the present that matters." Tears well in Eleanor's eyes. She sounds wise. She was. His voice softens. She also said, "I'd never really let you go." Said she could see it in the way I built things, always measuring twice, always checking the blueprints, always making sure everything was exactly right. Said, "I learned that from you." Eleanor looks down at the telegram, at the dreams and fears encoded in its brief message. "I did come back once, 6 years after leaving. The cabin was abandoned, but I saw you in town. You were with Margaret, and she was pregnant. You looked happy." "I was happy." He meets her gaze steadily. "That's not a betrayal, Elle, of either of us." The morning light shifts, catching the silver in their hair, illuminating the years that have carved themselves into their faces. In the distance, a truck rumbles down Old Mill Road, bringing them back to the present. "We should get back to work," Thomas says finally. "These windows won't restore themselves." Eleanor carefully folds the telegram, tucks it back into the book where it's lived for half a century. "Tom, I'm glad it was you who found the cabin, who's restoring it. I'm glad it's you." He nods once, picks up his sandpaper again. But as Eleanor descends the loft ladder, she hears him whisper so quietly she might have imagined it. "I'm glad it's you too." The rain starts just after lunch, a gentle patter that quickly becomes a drumming deluge. Eleanor stands at the newly glazed window, watching sheets of water transform the landscape into impressionist brushstrokes. Behind her, Thomas hurries to cover his tools and bring in the lumber he'd been preparing to cut. "Forecast said afternoon showers, not Noah's flood," he mutters, water dripping from his jacket onto the floor. Some things even technology can't predict perfectly. Eleanor retrieves a towel from her car's emergency kit, offers it to him. Their fingers don't quite touch in the exchange, but the almost contact lingers. The old radio crackles with static before settling on a clear signal. A vinyl record spins on its turntable, one of the items they'd found in the loft that morning, still in its sleeve after 50 years. Simon and Garfunkel's "Bridge Over Troubled Water" fills the cabin with familiar melody. "Still works," Thomas says, nodding at the record player. "They built things to last back then." Is that a dig at my tech empire? The question holds a hint of teasing, something new in their careful dance of interaction. Just an observation. He moves to the fireplace, begins laying kindling. "Though I notice you're not on your laptop right now." "Battery died an hour ago. I left the charger in Boston." She doesn't mention that she hasn't missed it, that for the first time in decades she's not thinking about emails or board meetings or quarterly projections. The fire catches quickly, and they find themselves drawn to its warmth. Outside, thunder rumbles, distant yet but approaching. Eleanor wraps her arms around herself, remembering another storm, another time they'd sheltered here. "You're shivering," Thomas observes. "Just remembering." She gestures to the windows, the rain, the fire. "It was raining the night before I left for MIT. We sat right here, making plans we thought we could keep." "I remember." He adds another log to the fire. "You wore my jacket home, never did get it back. It's in my closet in San Francisco." The admission surprises them both. "I should have sent it back. Wouldn't have fit anyway." His attempt at lightness falls flat. "Elle, don't." Now it's her turn to stop the conversation they're not ready to have. "Please." The record ends, needle lifting automatically. In the sudden quiet, the rain seems louder, more insistent. Thomas moves to change the record, and Eleanor watches his hands, still so capable, so sure in their movements. He selects another album from their morning's discoveries, and soon Etta James fills the space between them. At last, Eleanor's laugh holds the edge of hysteria. "Of all the songs, I can change it." "No." She turns back to the window, watching water stream down the glass. "It's appropriate, isn't it? All these years later, and here we are. You're still building, I'm still running away." "Is that what you're doing?" His voice is closer now. "Running away?" I don't know anymore. She faces him. I built an empire. On ones and zeros, created whole worlds out of nothing but logic and imagination. But standing here, watching you work with wood and nails, making real things that will outlast us both. She shakes her head. I feel like I missed something essential. You changed the world, Elle. That's not nothing. Did I? Or did I just make it move faster, push people further apart while pretending to connect them? She runs a hand through her silver hair. Look at us. 50 years of silence because it was easier to send an email than to pick up a phone. Easier to read about each other in articles than to face what we'd lost. Thunder crashes closer now, and Eleanor jumps slightly, without thinking. Thomas reaches out, steadies her with a hand on her arm. The contact is brief but electric, carrying echoes of every touch they've ever shared and every one they've missed. We all have regrets, he says quietly. The trick is knowing which ones to learn from and which ones to let go. When did you get so wise? Margaret taught me a few things. His smile is gentle. She was good at that, seeing the truth of things. The rain continues its assault, but inside the cabin, something shifts. The air feels lighter somehow, as if the storm is washing away not just dust, but decades of carefully maintained distance. The record plays on, Etta James giving way to other voices, other songs about love and loss and finding your way home. Neither suggests changing it again. Dawn breaks clear and crisp after the rain, sunlight catching on water droplets that cling to the windows like scattered diamonds. Eleanor wakes in her rental car's reclined seat, neck stiff, a borrowed blanket from Thomas's truck slipping off her shoulders. She hadn't meant to stay the night, but the storm had made the mountain roads treacherous and Thomas had insisted. The cabin door opens and the smell of coffee drifts out. Through the window, Eleanor sees Thomas moving around inside, his routine familiar even after just a few days. She checks her reflection in the rearview mirror, smooths her silver hair, and reaches for the door handle. Inside, Thomas stands at a makeshift counter, a piece of paper in his hands. Not just any paper, her mother's pancake recipe, preserved in the same book that had held the telegram. Found this while cleaning up last night, he says without turning around. Thought you might be hungry. The gesture catches her off guard. You remember? Sunday mornings. Your mother teaching us both how to cook. Now he does turn, and there's a softness in his eyes she hasn't seen before. Pretty sure I still have burn scars from those cooking lessons. That was your own fault. Who tries to flip a pancake one-handed? A 22-year-old showing off for his girl. The words slip out naturally, and for once neither of them flinches at the reference to their past. Eleanor moves to the counter, picks up a tin of coffee. Clara's blend? Joe dropped it off early this morning, along with some other supplies. He gestures to a basket full of fresh bread, eggs, and fruit. Pretty sure the whole town knows you're here by now. Small towns never change. But she says it with affection, measuring coffee into the filter of the camp stove percolator she recognizes from his truck's emergency kit. They work together in comfortable silence, moving around each other in the small space as if choreographed. Thomas mixes batter, while Eleanor sets up 2 camp chairs by the newly cleaned windows. Morning light streams in, catching dust motes that dance in the air. The first batch of pancakes burns slightly. For old time's sake, Thomas jokes. But the second comes out perfect, golden brown and steaming. They eat from paper plates balanced on their knees, watching early sunlight play across the mountains. I'd forgotten how quiet it is here, Eleanor says, sipping her coffee. In San Francisco, there's always noise, traffic, helicopters, someone's startup having a rooftop party. Must be quite a view from your penthouse. It is. She pauses. It's also lonely as hell. Thomas looks at her over his coffee cup, eyes crinkling at the corners. The great Eleanor Lawrence admits to being lonely. Don't let the shareholders hear that. The great Eleanor Lawrence is taking a 6-month leave of absence. Let them speculate all they want. She sets down her empty plate. Besides, I earned my right to be human again. Again? You know what I mean. In tech, especially as a woman, you can't show weakness. Can't let them see you as anything but perfectly in control. She gestures to herself, wrinkled clothes, silver hair slightly mussed, no makeup. This would give my PR team heart attacks. I like this version better. The simple honesty in his voice makes her breath catch. Before she can respond, a chickadee lands on the windowsill, pecking at crumbs they didn't realize they'd dropped. Some things really don't change, Thomas says softly. Remember how they used to come right up to the foundation when we were building? You used to save crusts from your sandwiches for them. Eleanor smiles at the memory. Called. Them our supervisors. Free quality control. He stands, gathering their plates. Speaking of which, I should get to work. Those upstairs windows won't fix themselves. I could help, Eleanor offers. I still remember which end of a hammer to hold. Think your shareholders would approve of manual labor? I told you, let them speculate. She rolls up her cashmere. Sleeves. Show me what to do, Tom. He studies her for a moment, then nods toward his toolbox. First rule of restoration. Measure twice, cut once. Some things I never forgot. The headline in the local paper catches Thomas's eye as he's picking up supplies at Wilson's Hardware. Tech billionaire Eleanor Lawrence spotted in township. The article sits prominently on the front page, complete with a grainy photo someone took of her walking into the diner yesterday. Quite a story, Joe says, ringing up Thomas's purchase. Paper hasn't sold this fast since that bear got into the middle school cafeteria in '92. Thomas folds the paper, tucks it under his arm. You'd think people would have better things to talk about. Small town, big news. Joe hands him his receipt. Clara says she's different than she expected. More human she always was. The words come out sharper than intended. Joe raises his hands in surrender. Hey, just repeating what I hear, though speaking of hearing things. He leans forward, voice lowering. Channel 5 news van was asking directions to Old Mill Road this morning. Thomas's stomach tightens. You didn't send them toward the ski resort. Joe winks. Figured you two have enough to sort out without cameras involved. Back at the cabin, Eleanor is up on a ladder, carefully stripping old paint from a window. Frame. She's traded her designer clothes for borrowed overalls and one of Thomas's old work shirts, hair tied back with a bandana. She looks more like the girl he remembers than the CEO from magazine covers. We've got trouble, he says, showing her the paper. Eleanor climbs down, takes the paper with paint-stained hands. Well, that didn't take long. She seems more resigned than surprised. My assistant's been trying to reach me. Apparently my disappearance is causing quite a stir in certain circles. Joe says there's a news crew in town. Of course there is. She sits heavily on a stack of lumber. The board's probably spinning stories about my mental health, suggesting I'm having some sort of breakdown. It's what they did to Marcus when he tried to retire last year. Are you having a breakdown? She looks up at him, a flash of the old Eleanor in her eyes. No, for the first time in years, I think I'm actually breaking through. Thomas's phone buzzes. A text from Karen. Dad, why didn't you tell me Eleanor Lawrence was your mystery client? There's stuff about her all over the news, and Amy from book club says her cousin saw you two having coffee at Clara's yesterday. Karen? Eleanor asks, recognizing something in his expression. News travels fast. He shows her the text. She's worried. About me being here? About me. He sits beside her on the lumber pile. She was 11 when Margaret got sick. The first time watched me fall apart, then pull myself together. She's protective. Eleanor nods, understanding. We should talk to her. Explain. Explain what, exactly? The question hangs between them, heavy with implications. Before she can answer, a car door slams outside. Through the window, they see Sarah Chen hurrying up the path, tablet in hand. Eleanor, there's a situation. Sarah stops short at seeing them sitting so close together, but recovers quickly. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They're citing the leadership stability clause. They can't force me out, Eleanor says, but she's already reaching for her phone. They're painting this as erratic behavior. The media's running with it. Tech pioneer's mysterious disappearance, rumors of stress-induced breakdown. Sarah hesitates. There's also speculation about personal entanglements. Thomas stands abruptly. I'll give you privacy. Tom, but he's already heading outside, tools in hand. Through the window, Eleanor watches him begin work on the garden shed, his movements precise and controlled. Even angry, she thinks, he creates rather than destroys. Her phone shows 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, and over 100 emails, the modern world demanding her return. She looks around the cabin at the half-finished repairs, the shared coffee cups from breakfast, the peace she's found here. The board meets tomorrow at 9, Sarah says gently. Eleanor nods, fingers finding her locket. Inside, young Thomas smiles up at her, unaware of the choices that would shape their lives. Book me a flight to San Francisco, she says finally, but not until tomorrow morning. Eleanor, one more night, Sarah. The world can wait that long. After Sarah leaves, Eleanor picks up her paint scraper and climbs back up the ladder. Through the window, she can see Thomas working, his rhythmic movements a counterpoint to her own. Soon, the news vans will find them. The phones will keep ringing. Reality will intrude. But for now, there's just the sound of their work, the afternoon light, and the weight of things not yet said. Eleanor sits at her makeshift desk in the breakfast nook, staring at her laptop screen. The resignation letter is half-written, cursor blinking accusingly at the end of an unfinished sentence. Outside, Thomas works on the garden shed, the steady rhythm of his hammer, a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Her phone hasn't stopped buzzing, messages from the board, her assistant, various news outlets. But it's the email from Gregory, her CFO, that demands attention. They're moving to invoke the mental fitness clause. Tomorrow's meeting isn't a discussion, it's an execution. Don't let them take what you built, E. Come back and fight, she. Minimizes his email, returns to the resignation letter. 30 years of building, innovating, leading, reduced to a few paragraphs of corporate speak about pursuing other opportunities and time for new leadership. The sound of hammering stops. Through the window, she watches Thomas step back to assess his work on the shed. Even from here, she can read the tension in his shoulders. He knows she's leaving tomorrow. They haven't talked about it, but the knowledge sits between them like a physical presence. Her fingers move to her locket, but instead of opening it, she reaches for the final item from the time capsule. A sketch she'd made of their future home, complete with morning glories climbing. The porch posts and rocking chairs facing the sunset. She'd drawn it the day before the MIT telegram arrived, her last moment of certainty about what she wanted. A knock at the door startles her. Karen stands there looking so much like Margaret it makes Eleanor's chest tight. Dad said you'd be here. Karen's voice is carefully neutral. I brought lunch. Clara's chicken salad. She said it was your favorite. Eleanor gestures to the camp chairs. Your father's out back. I know. I'd like to talk to you first. They sit. The sandwich. Container between them untouched. Karen studies Eleanor with eyes that see too much. Margaret's eyes. When I was little, Karen begins, Dad used to bring me up here sometimes. He'd work on small projects, birdhouses mostly, and tell me stories about the girl who drew blueprints for fun. I used to think you were made up, this perfect first. Love he had to let go so he could meet my mom. Karen, let me finish. Mom knew about you, about this place. Before she died, she made me promise to watch out for Dad, to make sure he didn't shut himself away in his grief. Karen's voice catches. But she also said that if love ever found him again, I shouldn't stand in its way. Eleanor's hand trembles as she reaches for her coffee cup. It's not that simple. Because of your company, the board meeting tomorrow. You've seen the news. I've seen a lot of scared people trying to control something they don't understand. Karen leans forward. What I haven't seen is anyone asking what you want. The question hits Eleanor like a physical blow. What does she want? The empire she's built, the power she's earned? Or this quiet place where her hands get dirty and her heart feels full? I don't know anymore, she admits. Yes, you do. Karen stands, brushes off her jeans. You just have to decide if you're brave enough to choose differently this time. She leaves the sandwich container and walks out, stopping to hug her father as he comes in from the shed. Through the window, Eleanor watches their easy affection, sees the life Thomas built after she left, solid, real, rooted in love. Her laptop screen has gone dark. Eleanor wakes it with a touch, looks at her half-written resignation. Delete key or send. Empire or essence. Run away or come home. The hammer's rhythm resumes outside. Eleanor opens a new document and begins to type, "Dear Board of Directors, for 30 years I've helped build the future. Now it's time for me to rebuild the past I left behind." Her fingers move smoothly over the keys. No hesitation now. Through the window, she can see Thomas working, can imagine the life they might have had, might still have. All she has to do is choose differently this time. The board meeting starts without her. Eleanor watches the clock on her laptop tick past 9, imagining the chaos in the San Francisco conference room. Her phone lights up with Gregory's call, the 5th in 10 minutes, but she lets it go to voicemail. Instead, she picks up her carving tools and walks to the basement. Thomas looks up from where he's reinforcing a support beam. "Thought you had a meeting." "I do." She kneels beside the old beam with their initials, runs her fingers over the weathered carving. "But I'm done letting other people decide when it's time to leave." Understanding dawns in his eyes as she places the tip of her carving tool against the wood. Just below their old initials, she begins to carve T+E 2025. L. I sent my resignation letter an hour ago. Her hands are steady as she works. Full transition plan, recommendation for Gregory to take over as CEO, everything they need to move forward without me. What about the mental fitness clause? Let them try. She sits back on her heels, admiring her work. I've got 30 years of ironclad documentation showing I'm making this choice with full capacity. Plus, she smiles, I still own 30% of the company's shares. They can't push me out completely. Thomas touches the fresh carving, fingers brushing against hers. You're staying? If you'll have me. She turns to face him fully. I'm not that starry-eyed girl anymore, Tom. I'm stubborn and set in my ways, and I still check my email too much. But I think maybe we've both lived enough to know what matters now. Above them, the cabin creaks gently, settling into itself. Dust motes dance in the shaft of light from the basement window, and somewhere outside, a chickadee calls, just like they used to, all those years ago. Karen told me what Margaret said. Eleanor's voice is soft, about not standing in the way. If love found you again. Margaret was wise about a lot of things. Thomas's hand finds hers, warm and calloused. She also said that sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. Eleanor's phone buzzes again, this time with a news alert. Her resignation has hit the press. The headline reads, Tech Pioneer Steps Down. Eleanor Lawrence chooses rural life over Silicon Valley empire. They're going to say I lost my mind, she says, but she's smiling. Chose love over logic, emotion over empire. Did you? No. She squeezes his hand. I think I finally found the logic in love, the solid architecture of it, the way it builds over time if you let it. Thomas stands, pulling her up with him. In the dim light, they're closer than they've been in 50 years. We've got a lot of work to do, he says. The cabin needs a new roof, updated wiring, proper insulation. She nods. I saw your list. Good thing I've got savings. Good thing I've got skills. They climb the basement stairs together, emerging into the autumn sunlight streaming through windows they've repaired side by side. Eleanor's laptop sits closed on her makeshift desk, the corporate world already feeling distant. Instead of checking her emails, she picks up a sander. Show me how to do this properly. Thomas positions her hands on the tool, his chest warm against her back as he demonstrates the right pressure, the correct angle. Just like when they were young, except now they know the value of what they're building. Outside, a news van turns onto Old Mill Road. Soon they'll have to face questions, cameras, the world's curiosity about their story. But for now, there's just the sound of their work, the smell of sawdust, and the quiet certainty that this time they're choosing right. The first snow falls as they install the last window. Eleanor holds the frame steady while Thomas drives in the final nail, their movements synchronized after months of working together. The cabin has transformed around them, still true to their original vision, but subtly adapted to who they've become. The breakfast nook now houses both Eleanor's laptop and Thomas's drafting table, modern technology sharing space with traditional craftsmanship. She's taught him how to video chat with Karen and Emma while he's shown her how to restore the antique furniture they've collected. They're different worlds, blending into something new. "Look what I found in town," Eleanor says, pulling a package from her bag. Inside is an old-fashioned copper weather vane, a perfect match to the one she'd drawn in her original sketches 50 years ago. Joe said it came from the Henderson place when they tore it down in '82. He's been saving it all these years. Thomas takes it carefully, testing its balance. "It's good work. They don't make them like this anymore. That's what you always say," she teases, but her eyes are soft. They both understand the value of things that last. Outside, the snow is picking up, adding another layer of white to the mountains. The cabin stands warm against the growing storm, smoke curling from the chimney where a fire Eleanor built this morning still burns. She's gotten good at that, at understanding the practical magic of wood and flame, just as Thomas has learned to appreciate the elegance of her coding solutions to their renovation challenges. The contractor's coming tomorrow to finish the electrical, Eleanor reminds him, though she knows he hasn't forgotten. It's their last major upgrade, bringing the cabin's infrastructure into the present while preserving its soul. Modern wiring hidden behind restored wooden panels, high-speed internet cables running alongside original support beams. Karen wants to bring Emma up this weekend, Thomas says, testing the weather vane's directional movement. "If you're ready for visitors." The question beneath the question doesn't go unnoticed. They've kept their rekindled relationship private, protected from the media circus that followed Eleanor's resignation. The press has moved on to newer stories, but their small town still buzzes with speculation about the tech billionaire and the widowed carpenter. "I'd like that," Eleanor says. "It's time this place had a family in it again." She watches Thomas climb to the roof to install the weather vane, his movements sure despite the snow. From up there, he can see all the way to town, where their past and present intersect. The hardware store where they first dreamed of building this place. The diner where they now have breakfast every Sunday, just as he used to do with Margaret. The small cemetery where their old lives rest quietly, blessing their new beginning. Inside, Eleanor adds another log to the fire. The living room has become a testament to their merged aesthetics, her clean lines softened by his handcrafted touches. On the mantel, 2 framed photographs sit side by side. Young Thomas and Eleanor at the summer fair, and Thomas with Margaret and baby Karen, not competing memories but complementary chapters in a longer story. The front door opens, bringing a swirl of snow and a triumphant Thomas. "It's set," he announces. "Perfect alignment." Eleanor hands him a mug of coffee. She's learned exactly how he takes it, just as he's learned to stock her favorite tea. "Now, we'll always know which way the wind blows." "Speaking of which," he pulls her gently away from the fire. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart skips. She may be 72, but some feelings never age. "Yes? The cabin's almost done." "Almost. But a home's never really finished, is it? There's always something to improve, to adapt, to—" He pauses, and she sees the young man she first loved in his smile. "To build on." Eleanor understands what he's asking. They've been careful these past months, respectful of their history and their losses, but standing here in the home they've rebuilt together, weather vane turning in the winter wind above them, the future feels as wide open as it did 50 years ago. No, she says softly. A home's never finished. That's what makes it worth building. Outside, the snow continues to fall, covering their footprints, marking the start of another season. But inside, they're already home. 1 year later, autumn paints the mountains in familiar golds and crimsons. The cabin stands proud against the morning sky, morning glories climbing the porch posts, just as Eleanor had sketched them half a century ago. The weather vane catches early light as it turns in the breeze, marking another perfect October day. Inside, Eleanor adjusts her silver hair in the mirror. No designer suit today, just a simple cream dress that matches the wildflowers Thomas brought in at dawn. On their dresser sits their newest artifact, a small photo in a handcrafted frame taken yesterday by Karen. It shows them on the porch, Eleanor laughing as Thomas tells one of his carpenter jokes, both of them grey-haired and happy. The cabin, a testament to second chances behind them. "Stop fussing," Thomas calls from downstairs. "Clara's here with the cake." The cabin fills with familiar voices, Karen directing the setup, Emma running up and down the stairs in her flower girl dress, Joe and Clara arguing good-naturedly about where to put the refreshments. Through the window, Eleanor watches more. Cars arriving, kicking up dust on Old Mill Road. "Quite a crowd," Sarah Chen says, appearing in the doorway. "Half the town's here." "Small towns," Eleanor smiles. "Never change." "Some things do." Sarah hands her a small package. "This came from your board of directors." Inside, Eleanor finds a hand-carved plaque. "To Eleanor Lawrence, who taught us that the most revolutionary innovations sometimes mean building on the past." Below that, a photo of the coding lab she'd endowed at MIT, named not for her corporate success, but for her father, the man who taught her to draw blueprints and dream big. A knock at the door interrupts her thoughts. It's Thomas. Handsome, in his dark suit, eyes bright with joy and maybe a few tears. "Ready?" he asks. "For 50 years," she answers. They descend the stairs together, into the home they've created. The living room has been transformed for the occasion. Autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, they restored side by side. Their guests rise as they enter. Karen and Emma, Joe and Clara, Sarah, even Gregory, who flew in from San Francisco. But also the ghosts of their past, blessing their present. Eleanor's father with his drafting tools, Margaret with her gentle wisdom. All the versions of themselves that led to this moment. The justice of the peace waits by the fireplace where they first rekindled their connection. The ceremony is simple, fitting for two people who have learned that the grandest gestures are often the quietest ones. When they exchange rings, Thomas's, hands are steady and Eleanor's voice is sure. Later, as their friends and family celebrate around them, they slip away to the basement. The old beam still bears their initials. 2 sets of carvings marking the span of their love story. Thomas pulls out his pocket knife, the same one he used 50 years ago, and together they add one more date, T+E forever. "Think that covers it?" he asks. Eleanor looks at the man beside her, at the life they've built, at all the years it took to find their way back here. "I think we've got a good foundation," she says. Above them, Emma's laughter mingles with music from the old radio. The cabin holds them all, past and present, endings and beginnings, the sweet complexity of love that grows wiser with time. As they climb the stairs to rejoin their guests, Thomas takes Eleanor's hand. Through the windows, they can see the weather vane turning gently, marking not just the direction of the wind, but the path that led them home. The cabin stands steady around them, no longer just a restoration project, but a living testament to the truth they've both learned, that some dreams take a lifetime to build, that love can be both first and last, and that home is not just a place but a journey shared by 2 hearts that were always meant to find their way back to each other. Outside, autumn leaves dance on the October breeze, gold and crimson like the memories that brought them here. Inside, their story continues, proving that sometimes the longest way around is indeed the shortest way home.